Okay, and WebEx says we're live.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for participating in our 10th Town Hall. My name is Julie Briskman. I'm Supervisor with Algonquian District for Loudoun County. If you missed our Town Hall last month, it was in honor of Poetry Month. It was a real treat. We heard some amazing award-winning poetry from Loudoun residents and one Loudoun high schooler who will actually be performing at the County State of the Union next week. So you don't want to miss it. Go ahead and look it up. It'll be Phyllis Randall's, Chairwoman Randall's State of the Union address next Wednesday night. If you can find a recording of all of our town halls and on all the topics that we've done over the better part of a year on our Facebook page. We covered the budget, public safety, Pride Month, and much more. So all of those are recorded on my Facebook page and my YouTube channel. Tonight, I'm pleased that we have been able to bring together members of the Loudoun delegation to the Virginia General Assembly to talk about their legislative efforts new laws that will impact Loudoun County, such as the Greenway Bill, gun legislation, and much more. This evening, we have with us delegates Suhas Subramaniam, David Reed, Wendy Gudaitis, Kathleen Murphy, and Ibrahim Samira. We also have Senator Barbara Favola with us. Unfortunately, Senator John Bell was not able to make it tonight. He had a last-minute conflict and wasn't able to join us. But I truly appreciate all of the General Assembly representatives that were able to be on tonight. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. We will try to get to as many of the pre-submitted questions as possible. If you would like to ask a question, you can put it in the Facebook discussion on the event below the recording. And if you don't get your question answered tonight, feel free to email zachary.harris@loudoun.gov and we'll put you in touch with the right person. We won't be able to get to all of the important work. We're just going to highlight some of the bills that these delegates and senators were able to get through the General Assembly this year. But my staff will be putting a link a link that will send you to a summary of their bills that they were able to work on this year and the legislation that got passed. We should all be really proud and thankful that we have these representatives working so hard for us in Richmond. First of all, Delegate Subramaniam, Suhas. I mentioned in my opening the Greenway, and the price of tolls on the Greenway have been a source of frustration and concern for Loudoners for many, many years. So I'd love it if you could share with us the progress that you made on that this year.
Right, thank you, Supervisor Briskman, and thank you for all the other delegates and senators on the call today. Yeah, we had a very interesting session because we had to do it all virtually, at least on the House side. So, imagine all the things that go on in the General Assembly trying to get legislation passed, and imagine trying to doing it in your living room or in your home office. And so that made it all more impressive, all the amazing work we were able to get done. This may be a nonpartisan forum, but I'm partisan, and it was because of Democrats being in charge that we were able to do it, frankly. We have a very united Democratic Party that is in line with what Virginians want. And a great example of that was a lot of the legislation we passed on gun reform and protecting choice. And as you mentioned, the Greenway, local priorities for Loudoun County. We have seen the Greenway tolls increase dramatically over the past 10 years. And, we were facing potentially even more increases under the current statute. But two things have happened in the past 6 months that have really changed the game on toll increases. One was the legislation we passed, which basically limits their ability to have, basically makes it impossible to have multi-year toll increases, because every time the Greenway wants a toll increase, they have to come back to the State Corporation Commission and repetition. And before, they got automatic increases on a multi-year basis. And so, that's a lot of jargon, but the long story short is it's going to be really hard for them to increase tolls, given the current regulatory structure that they're going to be facing with this bill. And then the second thing that happened was the SEC, they heard the feedback. Delegate Reed Delegate Gudaitis, Senator Bell, and many others on this call were testified before the SEC and made a very convincing case, I think, that they should not be approving the 6% increases every year. And they hurt us. So, there's going to be a small increase for off-peak tolls, 25 more cents. You may have seen it went up 25 cents last week. And then after that, it's going to be really hard for them to increase tolls. And, the long term, we're hoping we can make tolls affordable. I'd love for there to be no tolls, but, in the meantime, having affordable tolls and, being able to take that road, which is kind of just a tough part of our infrastructure, would be great. So, and a lot of that was because of the work that you did, Supervisor Briskman, and the rest of the board, and helping us make that happen, and giving us the substantive feedback that we needed to go into the General Assembly and convince our colleagues to pass that bill. So thank you.
Oh, please, thank you. I know that lots of Loudoners are very happy to hear this news. One other thing that I know that you worked on that we're very happy about is allowing school boards to prohibit firearms in their administrative buildings. And we really appreciate you carrying that bill. I know my colleague, Algonquian District School Board Representative Atusa Reeser, worked with you on that. She's vice chair, I should say, of the school board. So we really appreciate that. And I think we're just waiting for the school board to actually enact that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the bill goes into effect, I believe, July 1st. So they can't act on it before then. But once it goes into effect and the governor has signed it into law, then we'll be able to hold school board meetings without having the threat of someone bringing in a firearm and things get heated, potentially using it. And I think after the events that happened in the Capitol, I think it's the safety of public forums is paramount, and we can't let something like that happen again. And so I think that was just one small part of a bigger effort, I think, to protect people who attend those types of events, as well as legislators like ourselves, honestly.
Yeah, and that I championed that at the board level when we were allowed to, thanks to the Democrats in General Assembly, we were allowed to pass an ordinance to restrict firearms in our buildings and during our meetings. I know that the school meetings have been a lot more heated this year, I think, than even our meetings, but they can get heated, and we have heard direct threats to us and our school board members. So we really appreciate that. Just one last thing, I wanted to let you address a little bit the new caucus that you helped form for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started an AAPI caucus, Asian American Pacific Islander caucus, a couple months ago. And it's funny because, Mark Keem was talking about it, another delegate Mark Keem in Fairfax. 5 or 6 years ago, you couldn't really form a caucus because there weren't really any other AAPI members besides him. But part of the amazing diversity, and not just in race, really, in all backgrounds, and we have Delegate Reed on this call. We all have amazing backgrounds, and we bring our own perspectives. And having 4 or 5 members of the API community be delegates now, which to my mother who lived here in the late 70s would have been unthinkable, is incredible. And we were happy to be able to come together, but there wasn't really a sense of urgency until some of the rhetoric towards the API community, some of the violence and hate crimes. I think at that point we felt like we need to come together because there's a clear mission that needs to be fulfilled right now. And so we're working on our bylaws. We've done some listening sessions, and I think we're going to have a legislative agenda that's going to try to address some of these issues next session. But we want to also empower the API community in Virginia to speak up, because this myth of the model minority, we don't really speak up as much about hate crimes or biases towards the community. So so I think that's part of the goal, and I'm very excited for it.
I'm finishing the book Minor Feelings right now, and it's very revealing, some of the things that are happening that those of us that live in our white privilege just don't understand. So I highly recommend that book. And if there's anything that we can do in Loudoun County to help you with your caucus agenda, please let us know.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, Delegate Subramaniam. And then I wanted to go to Delegate Murphy. You've been championing common sense gun measures for years in Richmond, even when we didn't have a Democratic majority. And I spoke a little bit ago about the gun prohibitions now in our county buildings and parks. And I understand and support this type of legislation at every level. Can you talk a little bit about Bill 1992 that prohibits individuals who are convicted of one misdemeanor of assault and battery of a family or household member from buying and possessing or carrying a handgun?
Yes, of course. The first bill I put in when I was elected was that bill. And the Republicans would not hear it. They wouldn't even allow it to be discussed. When you submit a bill, it goes into a committee and it operates by motion, and someone has to make the motion and someone has to agree with the motion. And when I put this bill in, there was just dead silence. They would not hear the bill. And it is a bill to take guns out of the hands of repeat violent domestic abusers. I don't understand. I don't understand why a man's right to have a gun in his pocket is more important than a woman's right not to be brutalized by that person. So I've put this bill in almost every single year. One version of it passed when Mike Mullen was put it forward. And this year, my additional version passed following the conviction for assault and battery of a family member. They can't have a gun. You have to remember that the reason that we've been able to do these things is because we have the Democratic majority. And that's the important thing, really. I started the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus. I co-chaired the Safe Virginia Initiative, where we went across the Commonwealth talking to people in every single venue. Wasn't just Northern Virginia, to talk about how they were dealing with gun violence and what steps they thought would be useful. Especially we talked to students and police officers and healthcare workers. It was an amazing conversation, and I think that some good legislation has come out of it. So I am determined that I will keep working on these issues. The other thing that I did this year was I got a rare disease council. Yeah, I know, I passed that. I didn't know it would be so hard to do. Why would anybody, object to it? But there are a lot of people, including in our family, we have a daughter who has cystic fibrosis, which is considered a rare disease. And I know what these families go through with the, additional costs and the cost of medication and the limits sometimes on kids' activities and how careful you have to be in school. So we were very lucky. It only took 4 years to get funding, and now we have this Rare Disease Council. And I had to have the medication for PKU, which used to be a formula. I had to get the name changed so that it's a medicine and has to be covered by insurance, and that took 5 years.
Wow, that's amazing. I know that so many of the issues that you fight for, Delegate Murphy, are born out of your experience with gun violence and with rare diseases. Can you speak a little bit about your efforts for women veterans in the state and what you were able to accomplish with that?
Yeah, I've never been a woman veteran, I promise. I don't have that kind of courage.
But you fight for women.
Yeah, I do. But so in my first year, the speaker assigned me to the Veterans Caucus, and I'm a military brat, so I'm very fond of the veteran community. And when I went in, I asked them at my first veterans meeting, what do you do for women veterans? And they looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. And what we found out is that for the at that time, 104,000 women veterans, there was not one woman veterans coordinator in the Department of Veterans Affairs. So it took me 4 years to get funding for the first one. And then fortunately, in this last session, we were able to get funding for a second one. And now there are 107,000 women veterans. And we named, I think it was the third week in March as Women Veterans Week. And I've held 9 roundtables across the Commonwealth to talk to our women veterans and see what are the issues, what are the things that we can be helpful to, as they re-enter civilian life. A lot of homelessness. There are a lot of really big issues. And I'm really, really proud that I serve on the Board of Veteran Services. I really am.
That is amazing work, and thank you so much for all of that and everything that you've accomplished. We will go to a little bit more of a roundtable conversation a little bit later, but right now I want to turn to Senator Favola to talk a little bit about some of the things that she was able to accomplish this year. You've also sponsored some gun sense legislation as well, which we really appreciate. And then you plan to introduce legislation next session that will place additional requirements on the 3-year ban, and will continue to work. You will continue to work to make VA's law fully match what's called the Lautenberg Amendment. So I was wondering if you would be able to tell us a little bit about that. Oops, you're on mute. Happens every meeting.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I thought I fixed that. So thank you, Supervisor Briskman. This is really helpful, and it's always great to talk about things that are important to our constituents and to hear from our constituents as well. I will just reiterate Delegate Murphy's bill, which actually removed a firearm from somebody who'd been convicted of an assault and battery of a family or household member, was the bill that actually passed in the Senate. However, it was revised in the Senate. So the removal of the firearm is for a 3-year period. And then the individual can actually have his or her firearm rights restored. It was quite a lively discussion, and we need to do a lot more educating on the impact of firearms in a household. 30% of our homicides are the result of firearms in a household. Almost 40% of our suicides are the result of firearms in a household. So folks really don't understand just how dangerous these firearms are, and they're somehow under the impression that they're primarily used for protection. That's just not what the data shows. So we're going to continue to work through the gun safety the gun safety coalition, or the Stop Gun Violence Coalition, and do a better job of getting the word out. And I do want to say that a large number of stakeholders actually support these bills, and stakeholders you might not expect, like the State Association of the Chiefs of Police. Because remember, 70%,
That is surprising.
70% of the calls that our local police officers respond to are calls of domestic violence or domestic disturbance. So when they go to that home and there's a firearm, it's our police officers who are significantly at risk. And in fact, we did have a police officer in Alexandria who was shot after responding to a domestic violence call. Not fatally, fortunately, he had a vest on, but that just sort of demonstrates that this is an issue that is really important and needs to be addressed. And we also had a lot of, domestic violence prevention groups and women's groups supporting the bill as well. So I'll move on.
Well, I
Go
just wanted to comment that is so important, and that the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence actually helped me with my local legislation on the firearms. And I do feel like every week we hear about a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old who accidentally shoots off a firearm and they pass away, and there's, it's permanent. And
And again, it was within reach within that
Right.
child's home.
yeah.
Yeah.
And my son actually lost a classmate and a Boy Scout buddy his freshman year, because there was a gun available in the home, and he killed himself. And it was traumatic for the entire class. And it's just
Yeah.
it's a permanent solution. They don't know it at the time, but it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So any way we can help get guns out of the hands of the young people and folks who just need that mental health support, happy to help in any way.
Yes, and we appreciate that, and we do know, and we've heard from our local governments and our school systems that there's a real thirst out there for more resources in the mental health area. And our past budget actually considerably increased resources to the public schools for mental health or counselors. So, and Loudon actually has got some of the best ratios of students to counselor of any jurisdiction in the Commonwealth. So we really appreciate that. Loudon's been a leader in integrating mental health services into the public schools, and we want to be a partner in that, and we want to strengthen that for you. So that's a good
Yeah.
thing. I do
I
chair the
think you wanted to move on to a different topic, and I'm hoping that it's paid family leave. If not,
Yes, I'm going to move right. I was just going to
Okay.
say, I chair the Women's Healthcare Caucus, and among all the things that we cover, paid family leave is important. Paid sick days are important. And I want to give kudos to my colleagues on this town hall. They've been very supportive and understand that paid sick days and paid family leave is simply a critical component to getting our economy back running again. Women were disproportionately affected by COVID, and they are still bearing more responsibility for the care of their children. They need to have that support network there so they can get back to work. And the men need that support network there. So we didn't make as much progress as I would have hoped, but I did get a bill passed that will direct the Bureau of Insurance to look at the private insurance market for paid family leave. And I'm sitting on that task force, and we're hoping that we get some good recommendations out of that. And then lastly, environment has been very big. And I did, with the help of Delegate Reed, 2 sessions ago, we passed an energy plan, Commonwealth Energy Plan. I updated it this past session to emphasize more environmental justice, more workforce training, and a faster transition to renewable energy sources. So that's it. And I'm happy to take questions. And again, thank you for hosting this. Oh, the last thing I'll throw out, among other responsibilities, I chair the Senate Rehabilitation and Social Services Committee, which actually had to shepherd through the legalization of marijuana. That small piece of legislation that took up nearly 70% of our time last year.
right, just that little tiny piece.
little tiny
Well, we just established an environmental commission in Loudoun County, so I'm very excited about that. And we're actually looking at local legislation for solar arrays, so
Good.
that's exciting. I also sit on the Metro Washington Council of Governments, and we just became certified internationally for our energy plan. And that's something along the lines of 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. So in my mind, there might be a point in time where we sort of have to see how all these things fit together. Because I feel like, as we've gotten more progressive in governments, local government, state government, we've got COG working, that some of these things have to overlap at some point, and we need to make sure that they're aligned. So I think that's something that
Yes,
maybe we can
and we're
work on
going
in
to
the
use every
future.
tool in the toolbox, whether it be tax credits or workforce development training, or however we have to do it. We'll try to use it what we can to move us along. By the way,
Well,
Zoom meetings are making a difference because people are not driving to their to their events. So,
Well, and it's lowering the barriers to participate as well.
yes,
And
it is.
I really appreciate all the work you're doing for women. And I'll just put a plug in for another book if you haven't read it and if the audience hasn't read it. It's called Invisible Women, and it talks about the gender data gap
Right.
that you find in just about every area of life. So it's a fascinating read. I listened to it on Audible first, and I'm like, I have to go buy the book so I can have it on my desk when I'm trying to work on ordinances and ask you guys to carry legislation. So I have data there that I can draw from. So thank you so
I
much
will check it
for
out.
all
Thank
of your
you.
work. With that, I would love to move on to Delegate Goditis. I would love to hear about your efforts to help keep children with relatives or fictive kin when they become part of the foster care system. You introduced House Bill 1962 to ensure more of Virginia's children who come to the attention of the child welfare system can be raised by relatives or fictive kin when parents cannot keep or regain custody. And please tell us what fictive kin means. I had not heard that term until I read about your legislation.
I absolutely love this bill. So
I do too.
since I had kids, my kids are in the early 20s now, but since I had kids, periodically in my life would pop up, whether it was a toddler or a 15-year-old or a newborn whose family, for one reason or another, was not able to take care of that child. And the foster system is so daunting, and there are just so many kids who need help. And Virginia has been one of the last states in terms of the success rate of kids who graduate from the foster care system, because they don't have the ties and the support that can get them launched as adults. So fictive kin, that is whoever you think of as family. It could be a neighbor, it
Right.
could be your cousin's third cousin. And it's someone who knows that kid and who can provide the kid with a home and some of that emotional security. And so fictive kin means someone who is kin, but not by marriage, not by law, not by blood, just by desire. And I love the term, and I'm really hopeful. And as I said, having known from newborns to teenagers, kids who were just, put out there, I need a home. I'm really hopeful for this bill. It's one of my favorites.
Was that one a challenge? Yes. Was that one a challenge to get through just that with that definition of fictive at all?
No, everybody jumped all
Good.
over it. There was a challenge because there was, and I'm not going to remember this right, but the way it was worded the first time we introduced it, it apparently stepped on some code that was already in existence. But we had a really wonderful attorney in that committee who said, but can we just look at it again and let's bring it back up next week? And by that time, we'll just have worked out the wording. So that was the only problem, but everybody loved the concept, and I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, that's great.
I just want to give her another plug. It did come through my committee in the Senate, and we were so happy to be able to provide more assets to children. So that even if a child remained in foster care, to be able to have visitation and support from fictive kin was really important. And then, of course, frequently the fictive kin can serve as a permanent home. So it was a very good bill. I do a lot in the foster care area, but I was so proud to see this come through. So.
And thank you to my fellows for your votes.
And then the other fascinating bill that I saw you worked on, Delegate Goditis, was the certified midwifery.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So, we think, okay, we have midwives. That's great. Well, it turns out that in Virginia, our midwives to this point have had to be certified. They have to get certified as nurses, and then they can go be certified as midwives. Well, it has been studied and studied and studied and shown that you don't have to have all the nurse stuff in order to be a midwife. And so, if I'm 18 or 20 or whatever age in life and I want to do this, I don't have to go spend $70,000 and several years getting the nursing certification and then then start again on the midwife certification. So this means that I can just decide I want to be a midwife in Virginia. And it's a great thing, especially for women of color, the mortality rate for mothers and infants is really scary. And the more experts we can get out there and the more midwives we can get out there to help with mothers going through this process, the better it is for all of us. So whatever we can do to get the midwife certified, it was also another really good bill for women.
I can't wait to hear how effective it is. Yeah, thank you so much for all of your work, Delegate Goditis. And now we will move on to Delegate Reed. You sponsored a piece of legislation that really resonates with me, and I believe it is critically important. Can you talk a little bit about House Bill 1980, the Enslaved Ancestors College Access Scholarship and Memorial Program?
Yeah, sure. So thanks very much, Supervisor Briskman, for having all of us here today. I mean, it is really very important because I think, as folks probably do know, is that you and I actually share 3 precincts. So there's a little bit of the Algonquian Supervisor District that is included in the 32nd District that I represent. And of course, we've worked together on a couple things with going out and visiting with constituents. And so I really do appreciate you being able to do this town hall. With House Bill 1980, and I think it's really kind of important because as you've heard all of the different people talking here today, we really are kind of the sum total of our own individual experiences. And so for me, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's like my family's lived here in Virginia since about the 1700s. And through that entire time, I'm the first person in my family to ever get a college degree. And so in recognizing that being able to get a college degree was such an important thing for me to be able to kind of change that cycle that my family had lived in for generations, that combined with the issues that we were addressing during the summer, as far as how do we reconcile with our 400-year past, where the fact that Virginia is the state where slavery actually first came to the United States, and how do we bring all of that together? And so the idea behind this was we were able to identify the 5 universities that prior to 1865 had actually built their foundational success by using enslaved labor. And then looking at that, it was how can we actually encourage those universities to be able to give back to those ancestors so that they would be able to break that cycle of poverty that their families have lived in for generations. So that was kind of the impetus for what the legislation does. And I will tell you that when it originally started, it was really intended to be just a scholarship program. But this is one of the things that really kind of highlights how the legislative process works when you actually get down to Richmond, because a good idea you have in Loudoun when you're sitting at home at the kitchen table may not necessarily be a good idea when you get to Richmond and you start talking to more subject matter experts. And this was a really good case because University of Virginia has done a really great job of identifying 4,000 to 5,000 enslaved individuals who helped build and operate the university in its early days. At the other end of the spectrum, you have Longwood University, who initially existed as a female teaching seminary, and they have very little in the way of records. So we couldn't use the same cookie cutter approach for each one of those. So that prompted us to actually step back and then empower SCHEV, which is the State Council of Higher Education of Virginia, to be able to tailor a program with each one of the 5 universities. So that means that the program at Longwood may be a little bit different than the program that is at Virginia, at UVA. And let me just give you an idea of what the long-term impact of this could be. If you think about the fact that in the 2022-2023 academic year, when the first scholarship is awarded at UVA to an ancestor of an enslaved individual, then 5 generations from that, if that individual just has 2 children and then they then have 2 children, that means that 5 generations from then, that there's going to be 60 families that are going to have been positively impacted by just one scholarship at one university. But this is actually going to be done at 5 different universities, and it's going to be done over multiple generations. because the idea is that we're dealing with trying to address a problem that has been 400 years in the making. And so therefore we need to be thinking about how are we going to address this over multiple generations. So I'm very proud of the work that we did with this. It passed the House, I think, with bipartisan support of 61 to 39. And then it also passed with bipartisan support in the Senate. And we did a bill signing down in Charlottesville at the new enslaved memorial to laborers with the governor. So that was really very, very special.
That is actually amazing when you put it in the perspective of how many generations could be impacted. But also, if you kind of think about it in the reverse as to how many generations were impacted because they weren't able to go to college. And I'd love to talk to you more about this maybe offline, because as you may know, we signed a letter of apology basically to the African American community in Loudoun County for the massive resistance and being one of the last jurisdictions to desegregate. And we did it jointly with the school board. And I keep having this stirring around in my head. Well, we didn't fund the schools. We have generations and generations that may not have even gotten through high school because of that. And so then how do we come in now knowing that it was our board that did it? We signed a letter of apology. To me, that opens a window to maybe rectifying that a little bit at the county level. So I would love to talk to you.
I'd be happy to work with you and talk with you. And you really bring up a really good point, because one of the things that I pointed out when we were down at the bill signing, I mean, it's a really very impressive memorial that they have at UVA, but it's actually a physical memorial. And what we need to be thinking about is how do we do kind of a memorial of the mind? How do we actually allow for opportunities to exist for people to be able to change? We have to be able to address the human impact of the enslaved period, not just putting up memorials that, you know, they have an important place in society, but it's like, how do we address the human impact?
Yes, I completely agree, and I look forward to discussing it with you further. Is there anything else that you worked on in this session, Delegate Reed, that you'd like to share?
Well, there were a lot of things. I mean, it was a really very busy session, despite the fact that we were doing it virtually. And as others had pointed out, there are some really good things that kind of came out of the virtual environment. First of all, we were able to keep everybody and their staff for being safe and no one else actually getting COVID. The other thing that happened is that we did recognize that we can do things like this remotely. And this is something that I hope will kind of carry over when we actually reconvene in person again. Because if you think about some of the individuals, for someone from Northern Virginia, from Loudoun County, to be able to go down and speak in the General Assembly, it's a 2-hour drive. But there are parts of the state out in Southwest Virginia that are 5.5 hours away. So if you drive 5.5 hours, then only to have your piece of legislation moved to the next committee meeting, do you stay overnight a couple nights, or do you go back home and then come again? In the past, if you went home, you missed your opportunity. Now you should be able to go home and then be able to actually give your testimony through Zoom or WebEx or something like that. So there will be some things that will come out of the pandemic that will actually we'll probably be able to implement going forward. Another piece of legislation, though, and I'll just do one and then we can kind of go on from there, is that one of the things that I've been working on for really the past 3 years is being able to actually put in place an electric vehicle rebate program in the state of Virginia. And this really, when you think about it, you've heard both Delegate Murphy and Senator Favola talk about this as well, is that sometimes a piece of legislation you may introduce and it may take 2, 3, 4 years for it to be done and for it to be done right. And it's not to in any way take away from the individual legislator. It's just that sometimes it takes time to kind of work with all of the stakeholder groups. And the EV rebate program is a really good example, because when it started, it was just an idea of doing like what other states have done around us, which is to add a $2,500 tax credit at the time that you're doing your taxes, much like what Maryland and other places do. But then as it evolved over time, we recognized that only individuals who make enough money are going to be able to take advantage of that tax credit. And we wanted to be able to put the buying power to get electric vehicles into a broader spectrum of people. And so what the piece of legislation that we were able to pass this year did is it actually would do a $2,500 point of sale rebate for, say, just the average consumer. And then if the individual is at 300% of the federal poverty level or less, they would qualify for an additional $2,000. So let me put that into perspective. And it also applied to both new and used vehicles. And these were first time things that have ever been done like this, as far as I know, across the nation. But let me give a perspective. If you actually go online and you look for a used Nissan Leaf up at CarMax, it'll cost you about $20,000. If you fall into that category where you can get $4,500 off or at the point of sale, now all of a sudden this car is going to cost you about $15,000. And so now we've put the ability to buy a fully electric vehicle into a much broader range of the consuming public. And the other important thing is that every time that someone is able to buy an electric vehicle, we're actually putting money back into their pocket every month, because then you're not having to buy gas or oil or other things. You just have to be able to charge it up at home. And so I was really very proud of the success that we'd be able to get that done. Now, in the aspect of kind of full disclosure, the bill doesn't take effect until January the 1st, 2022, because we need time to kind of implement all of that. And also, it came out of this particular session without any funding. And so myself and advocates are still looking for possibilities for funding. And one of those possibilities might come from the federal government, because as you've probably heard, President Biden is a big fan of electric vehicles and also building out electric vehicle infrastructure. So we now have a program in place that I think is probably a good model for the nation that will be ready to receive that money and then be able to actually push that out to consumers for purchasing electric vehicles, hopefully in the not too distant future.
That is amazing, and I love that that Virginia is potentially leading on that. So congratulations on that. And for those that don't know, on the Loudoun County Board, we're not allowed to clap, so we do a lot of jazz hands. I see Senator Favola pick that up. So if you see me going like this, that means I like it. So thank you so much, Delegate Reed. Excuse me, that's amazing, and I want to go buy an electric vehicle now, even though I just paid off my car. So now we're going to move to Delegate Samira. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too.
We've just been highlighting some of the bills that that the Loudoun delegation has been getting passed and signed into law and impacting not only Loudoners but Virginian residents across the board. And I was very intrigued by 3 bills that you shared, one on campaign finance, another on child support and health care. But the one I'd love to delve into is on affordable housing. I know you and I have talked about affordable housing a couple times over the last 15 months or so. And as you know, we just are on the threshold of blessing the county's unmet housing needs strategy. Right now, it's been sent to our TLUC committee. But I would love it if you could tell us and the audience about House Bill 2053 and why you felt that that was important for you to sponsor.
Sure. Yeah, accessory dwelling units is just a starting point for a conversation. First of all, thank you so much, Julie, for having this wonderful meeting of legislators of Loudoun County. I know there's so much that we've done, and we're all so proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish for the Commonwealth, and to show what it's like to get us to 2021, where laws have to be meeting the needs of people, of course. And there's so much more needs to cover. Of course, affordable housing is a critical issue in Northern Virginia. Across the board in my district, I think there's not less than $1,600 for a 1-bedroom that's available for rent. And that's a pretty bad 1-bedroom as well. If you've ever visited any of those $1,600 1-bedrooms, they were built maybe 40, 50 years ago. There's a lot of health issues there with air quality, with insects pests that are running around. I mean, there's all sorts of problems with those places. And it's, of course, kicking out our young and our old. I meet so many people at the doors that are wondering, once they hit retirement, do they sell their house? Because I don't know if they can really go anywhere after that, or do they continue to pay property taxes, which are extremely high compared to what they expect. And so there's so many variables there that require us to really take this affordable housing issue seriously. But one of the first things that we could do is create infill development. Infill development is allowing people the property rights to use their homes flexibly, to say that they can rent out their basement. Or if they want to get creative and turn some other space in their house into livable spaces, meeting the county, of course, safety and building codes, they should be allowed to. What that would eventually do is it would create income for individuals that own homes that may not be able to pay those property taxes by renting those spaces in their homes for $1,000 a month, $900 a month. Those are wonderful resources, of course, that allow older individuals to retire in home, but also offer a place to live for young and for people of color that can't access the wonderful zip codes that we represent, the high grade schools that we have, and the wonderful public resources that we offer in our localities here in Loudoun. Accessory dwelling units is an official term for it. It's called accessory living units in other places. I believe that Loudoun County, if I'm not mistaken, has already adopted it into their new, soon to be approved zoning code for addressing our affordable housing needs. And that's wonderful. And that's something that I think the rest of the Commonwealth should take part in. And there's barriers to that that are in the codes, in the zoning codes for many localities. I believe that localities all across the state should be helping out themselves and helping each other across the counties to address the affordable housing need that is 174,000 units short all across Northern Virginia's 5 counties. And so we have a lot of work to do, but that's the first starting point. It's never been done before where we were able to collaborate statewide between localities and state government to address zoning. And I think this is a new window of opportunity that will open up other opportunities, hopefully, that are common sense solutions like transit-oriented development also, which is another bill that the governor signed to guide our localities to build out affordable quality housing near public transportation systems. It's a great solution for our environmental problems as well as our traffic problems. Because if we're able to house people near public transportation systems, then they're not going to need to have cars as much. They're not going to need to use their cars on the roads.
You mean we shouldn't have data centers near metro stations? Is that what you're saying?
I think we should have data centers. I think we should also have places for people.
I said, should we have data centers near metro stations?
If that's a job that people that can live there can access, I think that's a good idea. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's the right place to put them. I think they should be a distance away. But obviously, we need the jobs to match the income levels of people that can live near these metro stations. And currently that's not the reality right now. I think you really can't live around these metro stations if you're a frontline worker. These are the types of people that we need in our communities to be able to do the service jobs all across the board. And they currently are struggling to live in our neighborhoods, or they're overcrowding their homes and committing violations of zoning codes at the local level, which we don't want either. Those create safety problems of all kinds. So there's a lot of solutions around there, but that requires a little bit of a serious push on mandating them around metro stations to say that as did in DC and Montgomery County, they say that you need to have a minimum of 12.5% of units around metro stations to meet the affordable housing need, which is.
You mean 12.5% ADUs?
Excuse me?
You mean 12.5% ADUs?
No, and I was about to define it. Quality affordable housing is academically defined as 80% of the average median income. But I believe that 80% of the average median income in Loudoun or Fairfax counties is extremely high. So probably closer to 40% is probably where we want to be so we can accommodate the workers that are doing the jobs that are thankless in our grocery stores, in our supermarkets, and in our Starbucks coffee drives. Those are the people that we need to be accommodating as much as possible. And that, of course, creates economic revenue of all kind, because when you're able to build out those 174,000 units short, you're creating jobs, hopefully union jobs that are guaranteed with wages that allow us to establish a stronger middle class in Northern Virginia. So, and I don't want to take away from, I think, the biggest point, one of the biggest points, I should say, it's not the biggest, but the solution to the carbon emissions problem. Our climate crisis is serious, and 35% of pollution comes from vehicle use on highways. We need to take that effort seriously. How to reduce that percentage? And how do we also reduce the percentage of carbon emissions from poor land use? Poor land use is having people live farther away from their jobs than they need to. people love to live close to their jobs. I have a wonderful commute back and forth between the office that lasts about 6 minutes on Herndon Parkway. And that's something that I think everybody should be able to have. And that's the way we reduce 65% of the carbon pollution problem right off the bat. So while I admire the push from Delegate Reed to get us EV vehicles, I think EV vehicles are important. They're a part of the solution. Of course, to reducing the carbon emissions, we also need to reduce the reliance on cars as much as possible and get people on buses and trains. Those metro stations that we have along the Silver Line are pretty empty right now, and we can use some ridership.
We're actually getting ready to have our transit summit next week and in Loudoun County. And in preparation, my chief of staff and I went on some bus rides today. And you know, we saw people getting on and getting off, and I remember there was a gentleman, and there was a gentleman going to work. It was a parent, and then a woman going home from work. And I was like, those are not bad commutes, but the bus was definitely not full enough. And so, you know, I'll be bringing a lot of ideas to the transit summit along that. And then, oh, go ahead, Delegate Murphy.
I'd just like to make a comment that we put in the budget this year, I think $100 million investment in affordable housing. A couple years ago, I put in a bill to do a study on affordable housing, and Jeff Bourne had a bill in this year for affordable housing. So it's something that we really have been focused on. With the Democratic majority, it actually gets to move forward, however.
Right. Go ahead, Senator Fevil, and then I do have a couple questions we can get to. You're on mute again. Senator Favola, you're on mute again. Go ahead.
Apologize. There was also a bill that passed, and it was, I think, put in by Delegate Guzman to require local governments, when they review their plans, their land use plans, to actually consider transit development. So that's, local governments are doing that for the most part, having come from local government, but it's good to have that nudge.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mentioned earlier, I sit on Metro Washington Council of Governments, and we had a meeting recently talking about COVID and its impact on transit and land use, and how things are going to most likely change. And we really need to look at the use of Metro and public transit in a different way, because we likely are not going to have this flood of commuters 2 times during the day, and that's it. And again, back to that book I was telling you about about Invisible Women, and that women, when we go out to do something, our daily activities, we're making 3 and 4 stops, whereas the average guy is going to work and back on average. Now, I don't want to, you know, completely, you know, stereotype, but on average, the data shows that women need to make many, many stops. So the way that our transit systems are set up, it's not allowing that. And even more so, I think now with COVID and the fact that we are I think the study that we looked at showed that 64% of people want to telecommute up to 2 days a week. So that's going to really impact our transit, and it's going to hit pocketbooks eventually when you're trying to make these transit systems be successful and viable. So we really need to be rethinking that.
Well, there's a lot of uses for public transportation systems, and I think it goes beyond just going back and forth between work. And I'm sure that as time evolves, that just like other metros, you know, other cities around the country have more metro stops right along the way. We just have to create more usability for public transportation systems. We need to have more bike lanes. We need to have more walkable communities. I mean, these are the things that eventually will lead us to solving our climate crisis, that 65% of it. And you know, people are still going to want to travel to go to places of all kinds, and they have a lot of uses. So it's definitely, I definitely point taken, but I think that there's a lot more research that we're waiting on. And a lot more organic shifts in people's behaviors that we're still waiting to see how they.
That's a good way to put it.
Well, when you look at the investment that we're going to make in broadband expansion too, that's going to make a difference for people in needing to travel for work.
I know Senator Boysko has been working on that, and I'll just remind our audience that we put a summary of our delegation's bills in a link in the discussion. And I know Senator Favola, you were trying to say something earlier, but you were on mute. Try again, please. You're on mute.
Unmute.
Okay, am I?
There you
unmuted?
go.
Oh, I apologize. You can incentivize childcare capacity near metros, which is what I did on the Arlington County Board. We had some churches right on metro stops, and we, in an effort to continue to promote smart growth, which is what Loudoun's going to try to do near its metro stops, which is, have people live where they work and all that, which is, I think, what Delegate Samara was saying. You just the churches got either extra density or some kind of incentive to create childcare right on the metro stop. And that really worked. So it's an idea.
Fascinating tip. That is a fascinating tip. Okay, so we do have a couple. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I wanted to throw in a statistic that I learned yesterday about the expansion of broadband. So I found out that the number of unserved Virginians now in terms of broadband is only 233,500 people. And that is like a quarter of what it was a year or two ago. So it's on its way. It's happening. And so much money at the state level and at the federal level is going towards it. It's happening. And so what I say is get those unserved people served and then work on the underserved out in the country. But I just thought people would be interested in that it's actually happening. We no longer have to say someone ought to be doing something about broadband. It's being done.
And Supervisor Briskman, if I can just add to what both Senator Favola and Delegate Goditis had said, over the last 2 years, the state has put $100 million into broadband expansion. And that's what has actually resulted in this reduction in the underserved or the unserved communities. And that's continuing. And we've opened up the aperture so that there can be different technologies as well as also local municipal authorities can actually apply for some of that money as well. So it's made significant progress. And I will say that one of the things that we realized out of COVID, we used to talk about this as a rural broadband problem. But what we realized that it's actually an affordability and an access issue. And so you could have access maybe in an area of Arlington, but maybe you can't afford it. And in another place like out in Western Loudoun County, you could afford it, but you don't have access. And those are just two examples in Northern Virginia, but those play out across the entire Commonwealth when you're looking at broadband issues.
And again, with all of those people being served with broadband, it will, I believe, will have an impact eventually on our transit and our land use decisions. So let's get to the questions. Well, we had a comment on Facebook that said, thank you all for everything you do in Richmond. So thank you for everything you do in Richmond. And here's another question from Facebook. It says, what can we do to make Veterans Day a holiday for Virginia students? I know we changed up holidays this past year quite a bit.
Are we sure parents would like that?
I don't know if there's an appetite for that, but anyone want to comment? Go ahead, Delegate Murphy, sorry.
No, I just, every time we have a holiday, parents who work have to figure out how to have childcare. So I don't know if there is an appetite for another holiday, although certainly veterans deserve all of the accolades that we can give them, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think Supervisor Briskman, it's one of those things where it's a really good question, and if we remember, it's like November the 11th is one of those few holidays that is not anchored to a weekend. It's one of those ones that floats. So sometimes, because if you're following the federal guidelines for the holiday, sometimes it can be a Tuesday, it can be a Wednesday, sometimes it might create another 3-day weekend. So there would be a little bit of kind of a logistical issue with that. I think that's one of those things where we at the General Assembly level, it might be something that if there is an interest in doing that, that we would then empower the localities to kind of make those type of decisions on their own. Because the different school boards, because there's 132 school districts across the Commonwealth. And that's another one of those things that you have to recognize. And I like to tell people that it's like, first and foremost, our responsibility is to our local constituents. But secondly, the official title is state delegate or state senator. And so therefore you have a responsibility to kind of look at things across the entire state of Virginia. And one of those things is to actually be empathetic to the fact that issues that we deal with here in Northern Virginia and Loudoun County are not necessarily the same issues that people deal with in Richmond or Southwest Virginia or Southside. And so that's one of those things where it's like, if we were going to do Veterans Day, I would say that we would make it so that it's a local school board decision. And then they would have to figure out whether or not they're going to make that kind of align with the federal holiday, which moves around, or anchor it to a Monday or a Friday with the weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I hate to say it, but I've had neighbors, dual income families who say that they enjoy having Veterans Day off when the kids don't. It was always like the one day a year they would go celebrate their anniversary or something like that. So,
And I will say from my own personal experience that it's kind of nice because I work as a defense contractor, and so it is a day that I do get off. And so when it is on a Wednesday, it's kind of nice to have that break in the middle of the week.
Yeah.
Delegate Murphy, I know you have to leave. Do you have any final comments before I get to other questions?
No, I appreciate your doing this, and I love the conversation. I think we've covered an awful lot of really interesting and good things, and I'm sure we
Yep.
could go on for another hour.
We could. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure I will see you soon.
Thanks for
Thank you
doing
all of your
this.
work.
I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So one more question I saw on Facebook, which might actually take us to the end of our time. Somebody was asking, what's up for next year? And I think you have a special session coming, and then you have next year. So maybe we can,
Take a crack at that, and then I'll defer to my to my delegates.
okay, please do.
All right. Well, let's see what the upper chamber is going to do. We are going to have a special session, and a large focus of that session will be on allocating the Federal Rescue Act dollars. And we are looking forward to this task. It's, a lot of this will be one-time money, but there's a great commitment to really invest those dollars in things that will make our economy stronger and that will help Virginia's families. I know that we'll reach those 200,000 plus people with broadband as a result of the federal rescue money. And, Delegate Gudaitis and I know Senator Boysko are working hard on that, as are all of us. We're going to work on expanding capacity for childcare, I sincerely hope. I hope we can help local governments. On my to-do list, I'd like to ensure every water pollution control plant gets upgraded, because we've had overflow situations in different water pollution control plants around but this is just me speaking. So those are the kinds of ideas that are floating around. There should be dollars for investment in schools, and I'm talking about upgrading HVAC systems or, adding new roofs so we can move towards renewable energy, solar energy. So there's a lot going on out there. Local governments are going to receive money directly from the Federal Rescue Act as well. So I'm expecting we need to be very strategic. We need to think about our future, and we need to really invest in areas that will yield a higher quality of life, a better economy, and more security for our Virginia families. That's my 2 cents, and I will now defer to my
Thank
esteemed
you.
colleagues
Delegate
in the House of Delegates.
Supermanium, we haven't heard from you since the beginning, so do share what your plans are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're going to hear that we have a lot of really great plans. And the one thing we really need to do is re-elect Democrats this November so that we can actually implement them. because
Thank you. Thank you for
so
saying
let's not forget that first, and we even have some primaries and some folks who are on this call who we need to vote for as well. But in the, I would say that for myself, I've already started working with some folks on the Small Business Commission, which I'm a part of, as well as the Minority Small Business Commission with Chairman Torian on trying to see how we can do a couple of things. One, make it easier for Virginia businesses who already do a lot of incredible work with the federal government to actually work with the state government. We're relying a lot right now on contractors outside the state, where we could be taking advantage of a lot of the expertise here in Northern Virginia. And then also taking advantage of the expertise of women-owned and minority-owned businesses, which I think have contributed a great deal to the federal government. Again, trying to get them involved with state government. So we're working with the governor on a piece of legislation. It might come up during special session, but if not, then hopefully we'll have that for next session. And we need Democrats to pass legislation like that, unfortunately. So come out and vote in the primaries in June, and then again in November for Democrats.
June 8th for the primary. Delegate Reed, would you like to share what you're thinking about for the next session or the special session?
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of so the special session is likely to be somewhere in late July or in August. There are really supposed to be two different things that we're going to be looking at addressing. One is that at the state level, we're getting $4.3 billion in the America's Relief Plan Act. And that's just coming to the state. As you probably know, I believe that Loudoun County is going to be getting about $80 million. Loudoun County Public Schools are going to be getting 13 million. That's going to be coming directly to those jurisdictions. And so now the thing to keep in mind is that there are going to be some federal restrictions on how we can use that money at the state level. And so we're going to have to take a look at that. I'm on the Appropriations Committee, so we got a briefing on this on Monday. And it's still kind of up in the air as far as what those guidelines are going to be. We get some broad definitions, but we'll get something more specific a little bit later. We also, during the past session, we expanded the appellate court so that appeals can actually go from the circuit court to the appeals court, because Virginia is one of the 2 states in the nation who did not actually allow for appeals to go to an appellate court. And there are going to be 7 additional judicial positions that we're going to be looking at appointing during that special session in August. And then as far as the 2022 session is concerned, I'm just going to highlight a couple, 3 things that I've really started to focus on. One is that I think when you look at the top level research institutions that we have, the high tech that we have in Northern Virginia, as well as access to the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, one of the questions that I've often asked myself is why Northern Virginia and also the rest of Virginia is not more of a destination for venture capitalists and a creation of new small businesses and startups that would actually generate new jobs coming into the area. And so I have been talking with different stakeholder groups around the state to be able to ask them, what do we need to be doing differently to be able to attract more venture capital and generate more new startups and new jobs in Virginia? So that's one thing. The other thing is that we currently have about 1,000 to 1,100 vacant teaching positions across the entire state. And we have some programs that are in place to try to attract new teachers. And so I've been working with the Deputy Secretary of Education to see what is actually going well with those programs and what is not, and how we can actually create a program where we can actually get more teachers into the pipeline and fill those vacancies. And so those are a couple of the things that I have been working on already. And so I think that it's going to be really interesting, because we're at a point where you have to really kind of look, and this is one of those things where it's like, it requires a lot more time to do some of these more difficult things. And that's the reason why it's like you hear some of us starting now, because the problems become much more complex, and people have tried to solve these problems in the past, but I think we really do have an opportunity to address them now.
Absolutely.
And staying with consistent representation probably would help with that.
Yes, it
Delegate Goodnightis, would you like to share what you, and I don't know how you guys do it. I feel like since 2017, you haven't really gotten a break. I mean, between regular session and then special sessions, you had special sessions because of the Virginia Beach shootings, and then we went right into COVID, and you had to have special sessions for that. So kudos to you guys. I mean, I know you must be exhausted. So thanks again for coming on tonight. But Delegate Gudaitis, would you like to share what you're thinking about championing next?
Well, I think that our special session in the summer has been pretty well covered. I'll say that for me, I'm vice chair of the Agriculture Chesapeake Natural Resources Committee. I'm chair of the Ag Subcommittee. So a lot of my focus is on environment, agriculture, conservation. And so in those areas, we are looking at carbon sequestration, which is a way of easing carbon emissions. But we have to do it in such a way that it benefits farmers. So looking at those kinds of things, always looking to get more money for preservation of agricultural land. And but in the other area, and one thing I didn't talk about before, I worked hard with Senator Jennifer McClellan and Delegate Marcia Price to protect our domestic workers. And very, very proud of the progress we're making there, although it's never quite enough. So I want to make more progress next year working for those people, mostly women. And I want them to have workers' comp, because if my father, who wouldn't use the wheelchair, pulled her down when he fell and then she had to pick him up, and if that hurt her back, guess what? She deserves to be able to feed herself and pay rent while she recovers from that back injury. And so we have a way to go on that. And these domestic workers, these wonderful women who cared for my parents in the last few years of their lives. I lost my parents almost exactly a year ago, both of them. And seeing these women who had trouble paying their rent and buying their groceries, and yet showed up at my parents' house smiling and loving and baking cinnamon buns for them from scratch, cutting their hair and feeding their cats. And it just, their value is so high, and they have all the rights that everybody else has. So it is a mission of love for me to do what I can for that segment of our working population.
That's an amazing goal. Thank you for that. Yeah. Delegate Samira, would you like to share what your goals and aspirations are for the next session? And then I have one more question, which I think you guys are going to really like to answer.
Sure. Yeah, there's so much that I hear at the doors when I'm talking to people. They don't want to have to experience another economic meltdown and pandemic ever again. And the best way to protect ourselves against a future pandemic and a subsequent economic meltdown that we're going to have to be dealing with for years to come is to make sure that healthcare is guaranteed at no cost for everybody that seeks healthcare. We have a problem that we are not in line with the rest of the industrialized world. It's an industrialized nation's solution to having a healthy workforce and a healthy economy. And we need to make sure that it's guaranteed. And there's several steps that need to be taken along the way. Of course, a public option to allow a competition to increase against private insurance companies that currently charge about 300% of Medicaid rates needs to increase. We need to have more competition so that private insurers can offer a better product or reduce their cost. Currently, as it stands, I do not believe that private insurance offers 3 times a better product than Medicaid does. Matter of fact, at my dental clinic and my work, I experience all the time patients complaining about private insurers more than they complain about public insurance. And as far as housing, as far as it being an unmet need, housing costs have gone up in the last year during this pandemic. The $1,600 for one bedroom that was pre COVID-19. Now there's not much on the market. There's not much out there. We need to be able to use sticks and carrots. For Loudoun County, for doing a great job on their zoning code, they should be rewarded. They should be given more money so that they can invest in the public resources. And for those that want to continue to have exclusionary zoning tactics, they should be put in a position where they have to follow the law and we need to strengthen our laws on in zoning and discrimination in zoning in particular, because we know today, based on research, that the way you zone contributes significantly to opportunity, to access to good zip codes. especially for lower income people, people of color, separated parents that are struggling to find a good place to live. These are people that deserve to have a good place. And so we need sticks and carrots. And I think that Northern Virginia can benefit a lot from that approach because we are largely doing the right thing in our localities. We need the rest of the state to catch up with us. And so I'll be trying to see how we can maneuver, very focused on the election currently. So thanks for shouting out June 8th, Delegate Subramaniam and Supervisor Briskman. We're rocking and rolling, obviously, all the way to then. But I'm excited for a special session after in August to get some really concrete, specific goals going. But those are the broad themes that I'm focused on the most, and I look forward to working on them. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you. So the last question, because we're going to be running out of time here very soon. And I'll throw it to our Senator Favola first. This question was asked out of concern about what our constituents are seeing happening in Georgia, in Florida, Texas, as far as voting rights.
Voter suppression.
And if Virginia is in any danger of going down that road. And I know that we made a lot of progress not to go down that road this year. So if you want to share on that and tell us what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And that is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. It is something that has elected officials. We should honor access to the voting booth. We should encourage more people to vote and make it easier for more people to vote. I just want to dispel whatever misconception might be out there. We do not have a problem with voter fraud in this country. We simply do not. The Justice Brennan Center evaluated it. Even the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative group, evaluated fraud. It just is not there. I think the Justice Brennan Center found it was a 0.0003% out of looking at millions of ballots. So that's just not, it's not a reality. What is a reality is folks are not voting in the percentages they should vote when so much is on the line. The quality of their life, the qualities of their schools, the future, the kinds of services their children will receive. These are all things that government can do, and government can leverage the private sector to do, and government intervention can make a difference. I mean, Delegate Samara's point about healthcare. Well, government intervention is making healthcare more affordable and more accessible. And we need to respect that, and we need to get to the polls. So, in getting to other points that were made, Delegate Subramaniam said, gosh, elections matter. They do. And if we don't retain the Democratic majority in the House, it is very likely that bills will be introduced that will roll back all the progress we've made. We now have no excuse absentee voting. We're able to use drop boxes. We can start early voting 45 days before the polls open. Election day is now a holiday in Virginia. I mean, these were tremendous steps forward, and we really can't afford to have them rolled back. So I would ask folks to make sure you vote. Yes, we have a primary June 8th, and then we're going to have an election. Is it November 3rd this year? I think it is. So we need you. We need you to get involved. We need you to care. We need you to go out there and fight for democracy.
Thank you so much, Senator Favola. Completely agree. We do not have elections fraud happening in this country. And anyone that promotes the big lie should not only be ashamed of themselves, but probably should be censured and kicked out of office, in my opinion. So with that said, closing, do any of the delegates have any closing comments on, what we've done for voting rights in Virginia or anything else before we say goodnight? Nobody? You're politicians. No.
Well, I will just say that
Very kind.
the honor, I can't tell you what it feels like to sit in the House and vote for the first Voting Rights Act in the South.
Oh, gosh.
When so many other states are doing the shenanigans they're doing, and here in Virginia, we're protecting the voters and we are leading. And it feels really good because 4 years ago, when I was first elected, I kept marching across the aisle and saying to the other guys, aren't you tired of lagging behind in this and lagging behind in that? And Virginia is lagging behind here and there. And here we are leading on so many fronts. And this, to me, is one of the most important and most meaningful. And it meant so much to me and should mean so much to our voters.
It gives me chills to hear you say that. And when I saw that we were the first Southern state to pass the Voting Rights Act, I was just like, I couldn't tweet it out fast enough.
So Supervisor Briskman, it just to kind of put this in perspective, because prior to 2020, Virginia was the 49th most difficult state to vote, only above Mississippi. And in most categories, you don't want to be kind of in the same, quintile as Mississippi. And so we were just like one above Mississippi. After the Voting Rights Act, the other things that we passed in 2020, we're now the 12th easiest state to be able to vote in. And you can kind of see that based upon the turnout that we've had, because it's really important. And Senator Favola pointed this out. It's like voting is at the cornerstone of our democracy. That's what is so important. And we need to be doing things to actually encourage more people to vote and making it easier for them to vote. And when people actually question the election integrity, if you go back to the statistics that she was talking about, there have been many audits, many studies and analysis, and voting fraud does not really exist in the United States. And so when you're questioning the integrity of the election, you're actually questioning the foundation of the democracy itself in the United States. That's what you're doing. And you really need to think hard about that, because you're undermining the foundations that have actually made us the republic to model for the last 200 and some odd years.
Well said. I think we're just about at that bewitching hour, right?
We are.
You heard from the Senate.
Delegate Romanian or Delegate Samira, any final thoughts?
Vote Julie.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, also thank you, Supervisor Briskman, for putting this together. I learned a little bit myself, and I look forward to working on some of those priorities that others mentioned. And in the meantime, again, keep voting. It's very, very easy to vote now. And again, I'm the partisan here who needs to point out that the big lie is being promoted by every Republican that I'm seeing running right now. They have not walked away from it, and their gubernatorial nominee just got Trump's endorsement and said Trump's the reason why he ran. And so, this is the choice that you have.
Serious.
And the only way you can speak up is by making your vote count and getting your friends and family to vote.
Yeah,
So
it's serious.
thank you, Supervisor Briskman.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Supervisor Briskman. I can't echo any more than what I've heard, and it's wonderful that we're all ready to roll on November and of course June 8th. Please make your plan to vote. Early voting's already started. You can go to Loudoun County Government Center in Leesburg and make your choice. I believe from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. Some Saturdays, check on the election website. Primaries are just as important as generals. It's like exercise, right?
They can be.
You keep voting twice a year. You got to get in the motion. So
That's right.
Absolutely.
So it's actually, I was going to say it's loudoun.gov/vote early, where you can find out where you can early vote between now and June 8th if you want to get it out of the way. Guys, Virginia would not have made the progress we have made without you being in Richmond. So I can't tell you how proud I am to have you as colleagues down in the State House. I always appreciate your support. You guys answer my calls, you answer my texts whenever I reach out. And I'm just so proud to be serving with you and so proud of all the work that you do. Thank you so much. And thank you, Facebook audience, for watching. You can see this recorded on YouTube. and stay in touch.
Thank you.
Supervisor Briskman, you have proven to all of us what a great supervisor you are. Thank you.
We're glad to be
Awesome.
part of the
Thank you.
team. We're glad to be
Thank you.
part of the team.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Take care. Good night.
you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.